Everyone, welcome to another exciting and creative edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I am delighted to be talking with comics creator, cartoonist, illustrator Guy Gilchrist. Guy, thank you for jumping in, joining, and bringing Kermit with you as well.
Oh, my pleasure. And he's always with me.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Always good. Always good. So, folks out there will probably know you for your work in the Muppets as well as Just Imagine, Tiny Dinos, lots of very creative worlds out there that you've had a hand in. So, by means of a first question, I'm curious about what makes comics, visual storytelling, and cartooning this kind of perfect way to tell a story for you.
Well, because I think first and foremost, I love telling a story. And,
Mhm.
when you're a cartoonist, you get to be, you're not only writing the script, but you're the director, you're the lighting guy, you're the assistant AD, you're the AD, you're addressing the set, and then you get to be all of the actors. And, you decide what's going to be seen, when it's going to be seen, who's interacting, how are they interacting. You get to build an entire world.
Mhm.
And so you can put anything that's on your heart uh, in the story, and it becomes really a singular vision that you're putting out there and hoping that it connects.
Very
That's
well
what
said.
for me. In comics, Charles Schultz said it was in a daily comic. Charles Schultz said, it's the never-ending story. Uh, you know, it's a little bit of a story every single day. And people look in through, the window at that lovely little family, that goofy bunch of characters that we've created, and they look in and they see what their friends are doing that day.
Mhm,
That's
mhm.
look at it is, let's look in on our friends for that 10 seconds or whatever it is. And then, of course, in books, it's different.
Yes, yeah, yeah. You're working with just those words, just kind of the imagination, and then the story moves in a different way in the books.
Yeah, well, and also there's a big difference between writing for adults
Hmm.
and writing for children. In our relationship with the readers, in that, if as an adult, when I read a book, unless it's some sort of a manual of some sort or something like that, or I want to go something that a reference sort of material where I want to go back and look at it. As soon
Hmm.
as I'm done with it, if I've enjoyed it, I give it to a friend and they, pass it on down. But when you're writing for children, if you've connected with them and they've enjoyed it, then you become a cherished friend. And you're in the toy box with all the plushes and the Legos and all of that, or you're up on a shelf like this and getting pulled down all the time. And kids read the same book, or have the book read to them over and over and over again if they really enjoy it. And so it's a completely different thing. You know, it's really sort of a long haul thing when you're writing and illustrating picture books for kids.
Yeah, yeah. What is that process like for you, going from sort of comics to picture books? Lots of creative choices and decisions between the two, or is it a kind of a flow for you?
Uh, I tailor my storytelling to whatever it is that I'm working with.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, with the Tiny Dino series, I had an overreaching story arc.
Hmm.
Uh, and there were all of the little more personal stories within that arc. We had I had the original story of an English explorer who discovers these eggs, dinosaur eggs that had been in suspended hibernation, for millions and millions of years. And then they hatch. And he and his little pal Tort, the turtle, who is sort of our connection, our everyday these days connection to, the dinosaur, they raise the dinosaurs in secrecy.
Hmm.
And uh, and and since all of the dinosaurs were different species that are now being brought together from different eras of dinosaurs, all being raised as a family, it gave me an opportunity to make them a very unconventional family, and also as they grew. To teach within these other smaller books, shorter books within this overreaching series, different social skills, learning skills, and all of that. Now when you're writing you had mentioned Just Imagine.
Hmm. Hmm.
That was a book of rhymes that I wrote that were sort of silly fairy tales, and then some were poignant as well. But the idea was, to take something like the nursery rhymes of Mother Goose and write new ones.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so so everything wound up being of a similar era, which would have been, fairy tales with knights and kings and fairies and gnomes and and animals that could talk and all the things from fantasy lands, and but have them be very short, poems, just like in Mother Goose. It was sort of like a modern, Mother Goose.
Hmm.
So so of course, when you're telling that some of them were jokes, some of them were just thoughts that kids have. Um, I expanded that idea with the Nightlights and Pillow Fights series that I did, which had also that same sort of limericks and poems and rhymes, all from that sort of era. But it also had a couple of longer stories that were in, because of the format that I had. I had more pages, and so a different sort of approach to it. With telling a story in comics nowadays, and for the last 2 decades with computers, if you're writing a daily comic strip, the reader can now go back and look at an archive of
Hmm.
years
Hmm.
of the comic. But when I began in 1981, being first printed in 1981 in comic strips, there was no such thing. The only collections that you could get were in the paperbacks that you could get at a drugstore. So you were constantly reintroducing characters and traits,
Hmm.
uh, and the stories that you would tell. Uh, we really couldn't tell stories that were more than like a week of a story arc. Uh, so although for instance, the Muppets, which was already established as the number one show on TV when I started the Muppets,
Hmm.
we already understood, the world already understood that things took place in a theater, that, they were, a bunch of misfits that had become a family trying to put on a show. And sometimes it was, you and me against the world. And that was the overriding theme. But within that, of course, we have many, many characters with many, many different sorts of personalities. And besides putting on a show, they had lives to live and all of that. So it was already established. Uh, the show part, the
Hmm.
part I had to establish was, you know, uh, their lives outside the theater, and how they engage with each other, if they engage with each other, outside the theater. Uh, but when, even for instance, when I was doing Nancy, which I did for almost 23 years, uh,
Hmm.
if I introduced new characters, and as soon as I took it over, I did introduce a couple of new characters. I would have to introduce those characters over and over and over again because you don't know when someone is picking it up. And so uh, the traits that the characters had, we would have a recurring theme that I would do, different solos on.
Mhm.
Uh, Nancy likes ice cream, Sluggo's lazy. Uh, uh, and and the overriding theme of it when I took it over, because I took it over from somebody else, was I looked at it very much like I was talking about the dinos earlier, that there was that I would have an overriding theme, which would be that we need to all take care of each other, love each other, because what struck me about the feature and why I wanted to take it on was that Sluggo and Nancy were both orphaned,
Mhm.
and so Aunt Fritzy was really taking care of both of them, and so that was really the overreaching voice of it, even though it's just a jokey day.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Oh, and there's that demand, I'm sure, of creating something in like a comic strip serial format that way of being on and coming back with the story and keeping that reader in mind as well.
Yeah, very, very much so. Uh, as I said, now you can go back and you can read, as much of it as you want. But in those days, you would read one thing, and unless it was reprinted in a book or something, you wouldn't see it again.
Hmm.
And so the editors were uh, very much wanted to make sure that whatever story you were telling, that there was a joke, a
Hmm.
punch with every single gag, which is the reason uh, that that adventure comic strips and soap opera comic strips eventually left us,
Hmm.
because papers were because people were having a harder time. Uh, Papers got less and less popular, less and less people were reading them. The people that were reading them, oh my gosh, I mean, that they loved the soap opera and they loved the adventure strips. And I myself, when I was a kid, I loved adventure strips. They were like, seeing a piece of a comic book in the newspaper for free every day when it got delivered. But those sort of went the way of all things eventually. And what we were left with in the majority of the 80s, 90s, and up until 2000, end of 2017, when I left that particular part of my career, we were always writing for the person at that moment.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask about some of the things that you've learned across your career, but you might have already answered that. But anything else that you'd like to mention, just kind of a lesson learned, especially when creating for young people?
Oh, writing for young people is the most fun and humbling thing you can ever do. Any first time writer for children makes a mistake.
Hmm. Hmm.
They're smarter than the kids. They are condescending in some ways without even knowing that they are, explaining things, talking to kids like I'm going to show you the way. This is the way the story is going to go. Let me explain this, let me explain that. Well, kids say you stink. They are the greatest, because even if they don't tell you you stink, they just walk away,
Hmm.
or they chuck it and go, well, this is junk. Children are the most honest critics, and they have no other way to be. They're completely guileless. They're wonderful. And so when I began writing children's books, I thought about Bugs Bunny.
mhm, mhm,
I thought, like, what do kids think is the funniest thing? And it would be, you know, the little guy making fun of the establishment and being smarter than anybody. So in every book that I possibly, everywhere that I possibly could, in any story, the kid's the hero.
mhm, mhm,
And in almost all of my picture books, there'll be, besides the everyman, besides our main character, there'll be a little character somewhere in the art that's doing its own thing, either reacting to whatever's going on in the mainstream of the story or having their own little tea party, in the
mhm,
backgrounds. Because I started to realize that because children were seeing the book over and over and over and over again, that they would find all of the little details, and that to me, as a little child, I was always interested in the littlest character because I'm the little thing, in the world, in this big giant world. That's why we love Pinocchio, but who's our favorite? Jiminy Cricket. He's
mhm,
the little, you know, and it goes on and on and on like that. So when I was writing the Mud Pie books, I had a little mouse that was always, getting into mischief and doing things, whether the cat knew it or not. And when I was doing the Nightlights books and all of that, there would always be things going on all over the place that you could go find, so that with repeated readings, it doesn't get uninterested and uninteresting and boring. Um, but the overriding thing that I would always be thinking about is I I thought of Bugs Bunny because because Bugs was raging against anything that was telling him what to do.
mhm,
You know,
mhm,
he already knew what to do. And he wasn't a mischievous guy. He wasn't doing anything mean to anyone. He was reacting to other people that were in some way, shape, or form trying to keep him from getting to Albuquerque, which is kind of what he always wanted to do, you know. And so that's what I would think about. I would think I wanted my children in the strips to uh have the upper hand.
mhm,
Now, sometimes the upper hand would mean that they blew it, you
mhm,
know,
mhm,
and there would be a lesson that way, but I never had the parents explain something or an authority figure explain something. If they blew it, they blew it, and they were kind of like this at the end. Like, there's a story in the Nightlights One book, a trip to Storyland, where there's a little girl named Princess Claire, and just like my daughter Lauren, when she was very very little, she had curly long hair, and she hated to have it brushed and combed,
mhm, mhm,
and screamed bloody murder when you did it. And so I thought, well, what if Lauren was a little princess and she could have anything that she wanted? Well, the first thing that she would do is go to her daddy, the king, and say, I want every comb and brush and scissors and barber and hairdresser and everything banished from the kingdom. And that's what they do,
mhm,
because Princess Claire does not like to her have combs and brushes in her hair. And of course, so over the course of the story, hey, wrote it 40 years ago. So, if this is something that you don't know, and I've just bombed this story for you, sorry. Uh, but anyway, so everybody's banished, and over time, of course, her hair not only grows to ridiculous lengths, but she gets everything caught up in it, from cattle to cats to kitchen implements to this, to that, the other thing. And finally, she's completely tangled and can't even move. And they go find the one barber that's left in the kingdom. And there's so much in her hair that the last picture of her, she's completely bald and she's just sitting there on her throne going, you know,
Mhm.
and that's a lot of kids' favorite story in that book, especially the girls. And But it wasn't saying, oh, the parents were right. No, the parents were just as wrong as the child, because since the child was in charge, the parent, in this case the king, did exactly what his daughter wanted to.
Yeah, yeah. Sharing the blame, sharing the
Yeah.
responsibility. Yeah. I'm curious about maybe one of the most unforgettable experiences you've had in your career so far.
Too many, way too many. I saw that note in your letter to me, and I was like, yeah, there are just there are so many. The Muppet fans out there that know me from that, I have just so many stories about Jim, and that the things that I learned from him, that I could share something there. Um, I can tell you and I will tell you a Jim story, but uh, this is going down a weird path. I met a guy who's in his 40s by now, and he had read a book that I had written called Steggy Makes a Friend.
Mhm.
And Steggy is a Stegosaurus in the Tiny Dino series who is very shy, and the other characters around him are more outgoing. Um, but they help him through his shyness, and uh, and he becomes a hero at the end of the book. And this guy comes up to me, and grown man now with children of his own, and he said, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I wanted to kill myself.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, you're like in third grade.
Yeah.
And he was bullied all the time, and he couldn't find his voice. And it was his favorite book, and he read it every day.
Mhm.
And he said, and he said it saved his life. And I I can't even fathom that something that I wrote would have that effect on
Yeah.
somebody. I've heard that sort of story with the poems that I've written in more adult things, like the Nightlights newspaper feature and the Your Angel Speak newspaper feature, especially that I did for several years, where we were tackling, things and trying to lift people up.
Mhm.
Um, but that certainly, I hadn't even thought of it until it just jumped right out. Um,
Mhm.
the thing that the thing that brings the greatest smile to me is when I'm at a convention and people bring up the books and they're all drawn in and dog-eared and racked all to get out, and they bring it up to me to be signed, and they're apologizing for the way that it looks, and I'm going, no, 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 no. This is the greatest gift that you could ever give me,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it was loved, you know and isn't that what I wanted? And so that's very meaningful. uh Been around for a long time, written a whole bunch of books, and so hearing that I'm just a part of your childhood, a cherished memory for you, something that some things that I've done, you're now passing them down to you've passed them down to your children, and now they may even have bringing reading them to your grandchildren, is like the coolest thing in the world,
Mhm.
because all I was trying to do was entertain my own children and entertain myself.
Mhm.
And, you know, uh, making somebody smile is my favorite thing in the whole wide world. It's what I love to do, and it's what brings me joy, is making people happy. And so that's why I've been, you know, so busy. All of Jim. Going back to Jim, because people always want a story. And by the way, I'm finally putting out the memoir
Good,
uh,
good, good.
about the 10 years, that I worked with Jim.
Mhm.
Um, but I'll give you a story about Jim and his uh, selflessness. I've always found that I've been around people that are not only kind, but way kinder than they ever had to be. Well, one of the things that's in my bio, even in the short one, because it's such a big deal, is that my artwork is in the Smithsonian
Mhm.
in one
Mhm.
piece. And here's how that happened. So I was writing and drawing the Muppets with my brother Brad, and the phone rang at Henson Associates in New York, 117 East 69th Street, New York, New York. The town's so nice, we named it twice. So the phone rang, and it was President Reagan's press secretary saying that President Reagan's favorite comic strip is the Muppets, and
Mhm.
he reads it every day. And would Jim be the guest of honor at the White House for a state dinner that would be the ending of a day, uh, a weekend of the Easter egg festivities at the White House? And so Jim listened to that and he said, "Hmm, yeah, but that's Guy.
Mhm.
It's a comic strip. That's Guy. I think that Guy should go. You'll really like him." Hello. And so I went to the White House. And, uh, now President Reagan and Nancy Reagan weren't there because this was 1984, and he was over in Reykjavik, Iceland, coming to a disarmament treaty between the United States and the Soviet Union, because there was a threat of nuclear war for ever since the 50s. And so he was a little busy that
Mhm.
day. And so then Vice President Bush and his wife, Barbara, were our hosts. And if you're ever wondering about how to make somebody comfortable, you guys out there, uh, how to win friends and influence people and put yourself into the other person's shoes and find a way to connect, you won't believe what happened next. So, I'm what, 26, 25, 26? I'm scared to death. I mean, I'm at the White House now, signing autographs for hour after hour after hour, and playing with the kids out on the lawn and all of that stuff. Well, that's right in my wheelhouse, so I'm having a ball. But now it's later on, and I'm meeting Vice President, soon to be President Bush, and his wife, and I'm like, you know, just you, nothing gets you ready for this. And anyway, he says, "I read the comic today. It was really good." And then he cited it to me. So I knew that he wasn't kidding, that he had actually read it. And then, of course, he introduced me to Barbara. And then he said, "I understand that you're from Connecticut. So are you, and you love baseball. So are you a Yankee fan or a Red Sox fan?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Red Sox fan." And he said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I'm kind of both because my hero played for both teams." And I'm thinking, and he says, "So when I was playing," he says, "and I met Babe Ruth, this hero, Babe Ruth." And he told me the story of when he was playing first base for Yale. And Babe Ruth came to the game and came out and shook hands with everybody on the field. And then, just like you would when you're tossing the ball around in infield, he had the ball in his hand. And who do you hand it to? You hand it to the first baseman because you're done, right?
Hmm.
And you shoot him. So that's so he said, so have you ever been on Yale Field? And I said, yes, sir, in a schoolboy tournament, when I was playing. He says, well, if you're ever on there again, he says, and I hope that this happens when you have when your children are with you, so you can pass it on to them. So he was my hero, and so he says, if you'll stand at first base, looking in toward home, and take two steps away, like you're grabbing a grounder, and then you're gonna beat the runner to first. Just take those two steps and turn towards second, and you'll be standing exactly on the place where Babe Ruth shook my hand and gave me the ball. I mean, now, is that an incredible lesson? All of a sudden, because he had done all of that for me, and remember, I was there because of Jim's kindness, and now this man's kindness, I felt so at ease.
Hmm.
And so, if I can share, I hope that when I've shared that, uh, maybe we've maybe if you understand now why I try to emulate that sort of thing with everybody that I meet as much as I possibly can, and I hope that it brings a smile to your face, and also gives you a little idea of, hey, that's pretty cool. I
Hmm.
maybe
Hmm.
put myself in somebody else's place, especially if feelings are weird in any way that they are, putting yourself into the other person's place. Um, boy, boy, you know, we
Yeah.
get, don't we?
Yeah. Absolutely. Love that. Yeah. And in both of those stories, the story of meeting the boy who grows up and reads the book and it saves his life, and this other story of President Bush, both of those just illustrate those sometimes small things, sometimes the things we put out in the world, and we have no idea what the impact of that is.
Yeah, it's crazy when, I've been around for so long now. Most kids, when they meet me, it's like there's a sense of wonder, and also there's a why dead yet? It's a combo, it's a wonderful combo that, um I've been around for so long that I've had just the opportunity to work on so many things, and I've really enjoyed all of them. Um, and to find out that my fondest hope that I would do something that would be enjoyed has been achieved is the coolest thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, sending all of the gratitude for the time as we're coming up to our last question. I always like to ask about work that is ahead. So you mentioned the bio is on the way.
Oh yeah, yeah. And by the way, if you guys don't have these old books of mine, they are we now, I think as of today, we have around 10 of my books now that are up on Kindle and Apple in digital form. We've restored them and all of that. So that's really, really neat.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm just finishing my memoir. And it's really just about the 10 years with Jim, 1980 to 1990. How I got there, of course, will be in there too. Um, but I've shied away from writing a biography my whole life because I've lived a lot of different lives at a lot of different places and creative places. Uh, but um, but I started to notice that gee, it had been 45 years, and most of the people that I'm writing about, if they're still with us, you may not know who they are, because they weren't fortunate enough, like me, to have my name, in front of 150 million people every day. But they brought you a lot of joy. And certainly, it's important to remember Jim's character. His character is as important, if not as important. It's more important, I think, than his characters, because every character that he created had the same voice. And so I'd like to tell the stories that were very personal between me and him. And so it's called Jim Henson, The Muppets and Me. And we'll have it all on the digital formats by the end of summer or so on Kindle and Amazon. And I know that I'm going to, because I like to blab, as you just found out, we'll be doing the audio version of it. A print copy, I don't know when, I don't know when we'll do that. But it will be out this year. So I'm looking forward to sharing those stories with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, looking forward to that. And I'll be sure and link your website in the description and in the video so that people can check it out. And once more, thank you for the time. Anything that we missed that you want to make sure to share before we close?
Gee, this has been a wonderful opportunity. And if there are people out there that are, that are writing, all I want to tell you is what Walter Lantz told me when I was 10. The most famous animator in the entire world wrote me back when I sent him in my art.
Mm.
He said, and he said, you have a lot of talent for a 10-year-old boy. He said, if you keep on practicing and you never ever quit, someday you are going to be a successful cartoonist. And when I'm asked what's the secret of anything, I just say, just don't quit. Don't quit. And as far as the practicing, that means just keep getting better, doesn't it? Just keep getting better and better and better. And remember that the the world doesn't quit you, you quit. You have 365 days every year to quit. And all your friends will say, "Oh, I get it, man," and they'll put their arm around you and stuff. But if you have the fire and you have the heart to do it, and you don't quit, you're going to be successful.